The Wadsworth Mansion. What a great time that was. To get into the details, I'm going to have to set the musical storybook and put us back to, let's try January 15, 1972. That should do it. That is where the story begins. Now, I was living on Cape Cod in Provincetown. There was no band work down there. I was broke. I put an ad in the Boston Phoenix to sell my 100-watt Marshall stack. This was a big deal because I paid a lot of money for it. And it was kind of a status symbol to have a 100-watt Marshall stack. Anyway, a couple of days after the ad was in the paper, I get a call from a guy named Joe Perry. He says he's in a band called Aerosmith, and he wants to drive down and look at the amp. I said, fine, come on down. Here's my address in Provincetown. It was the very next day that Joe Perry and Tom Hamilton, the bass player for Aerosmith, showed up at my place down in Provincetown. They made the 3.5-hour drive in Tom's Ford pickup. They were really nice guys. They came in. Joe brought his Stratocaster with him, of course. He went into, it was almost like a sermon on how the Stratocaster was the greatest American rock and roll guitar of all time. I couldn't argue with him, and why bother? And we shot the breeze for a little bit, talked about bands, talked about music, and then Joe wanted to see the amp. So, of course, I took him in the room where it was. He plugged in his Strat, played some licks. It sounded great. He was totally sold. So he bought the amp for, I think, $750. He got a great deal. I helped him carry it out to the car and said goodbye to my 100-watt Marshall stack, status symbol of the big arena days. I thought they were behind me. Well, I ran into him about a year later at Katie's in Boston when they were having their CD release party. Now, we used to go to some of the parties they had at their apartment, and they were wild. They were legendary. When I had that chance to talk to Joe at that moment, I said, hey, how's the amp working out? And he said, you're not going to believe this, but it was stolen out of our band truck about a month after I bought it. I said, damn, wow. So there I was in Provincetown. I had just sold my Marshall stack, and I needed a break. One break coming up. Ding, 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 ding. Hello? Yeah, this is Steve Jablecki from the Wadsworth Mansion calling. I'm looking for Howie McDonald. I said, speaking. He said, look, I don't know if you know this, but we've got a hit record out. It's in the top 10 on the Billboard charts.
Sweet Mary, I'm coming home to you. Yeah.
And we need a legitimate guitar player like you to step in and help us record our next records. So I said, all right, great. Come down here and meet me. So he showed up a day or two later. He drove a Ford Econoline sort of touring van. He came in, he met Jane, my girlfriend, and I said, we got to see if we can work together. Here's some lyrics that I was working with. Where's the guitar? And I read him the lyrics, and within about 20 minutes we had, I can see the changes, fire in the morning, when we rearrange it, baby, There won't be no warning, fire in the morning. Fire in the morning. So I said, okay, cool, I guess we can work together. And I said, what do you have planned? He said, well, we've got a recording session at the Ed Sullivan Studio in New York City in 2 weeks. Can you make it? I said, let me think, I'm really busy, but yeah, I guess I can squeeze that in, sure. So he said, we're living on the east side of Providence. We have a mansion. It's the Wadsworth Mansion, and we got a room there for you. So I said, cool. I split my residency for the next 2 weeks as I went up and practiced with the band, with their material, and learned their album. And Steve and I quickly wrote some new songs, but mainly we covered the stuff that we were going to record. Now, in many groups, when you join up with people, you don't know them. You're like the new guy in, like Ed King was when he joined Lynyrd Skynyrd, and he was almost an outcast to the end. Well, this was different because Steve's brother, Mike Chiblecki, was playing the drums, and I knew Mike. And John Poole was playing bass, and I knew John. In fact, before I started my first band, I went over to this guy, Rick Silva's house, who was a drummer in Rumford, Rhode Island. And I met Mike and John over there, and we tried to have a jam session. But John said he was going to go out for the football team and wasn't going to be playing music and whatnot. But at least I had met these guys. So it wasn't like we were perfectly strangers. So we rehearsed. We drove up to New York City, checked into a fabulous hotel, and they booked a night or two at the New York Studio Instrument Rentals, SIR. And we were rehearsing, and I had just met the producers, Norman Marzano and Jimmy Calvert. And they had success with the Archies and the 1910 Fruit Gum Company. They were really bubblegum record producers. But they appreciated the legitimacy of the guitar playing aspect that I brought to the band. They had only heard Steve's raw demos. So when they heard the guitar solos that I had worked out in those parts, they flipped and said, oh, wow, this is really good. So we were on a break, and I walked out to the stairway outside of the rehearsal room, and I could hear the band upstairs, and they were really wailing. And I thought, wow, I'd love to be in a group like that. And I walked upstairs and talked to one of the roadies outside of the door. I said, who's that? And he said, that's Edgar Winter with Jerry LaCroix and Rick Derringer rehearsing for the Roadworks tour. And man, that was really, really mind-blowing, because here I was a month before selling my amp, and now I'm in New York City making a record. So we recorded the next day at the Ed Sullivan Studio. The records, we did 4 songs. They were really good, really, and I'll be playing them for you. So while we were making the record, in between songs, we'd go into the control room to listen, to see how it sounded. And after maybe the first song, there was a very attractive, buxom blonde that was all over Steve. She never met him before, but she was just a groupie and dug him. So that was cool. So we finished the recording. We went out to dinner, went back to the hotel, and somehow this girl, Valerie, ended up with Steve. And Steve and John were sharing a room, and me and Mike were sharing a room, and the roadies slept on the couches. About 1:30 in the morning, John Poole comes in the room, and he shakes me and wakes me up. He says, "Your turn. Go in my room. I'm going to sleep in here." I sort of stumbled in. I didn't really know what was going on. And I walked in, and there was Steve snoring away and Valerie naked and hot and horny. So I said, "Oh, I get it now." So that's how the weekend went. Well, I had a deal with my girlfriend, Jane. She said, "Look, I know you're a musician, and I know musicians get offers for sex. So as long as you don't screw anybody in town, I'm totally cool with it." So about a month later, we had been on the road and playing, and get a knock on the door, and a friend of ours named Albert Corliss, who was the bouncer at the Atlantic House, shows up with this girl, and it's Valerie. I don't know how he met her, but he did. So he says, "Howie, Jane, I want you to meet." And I started laughing and put my head down. I said, "I was out of town. I didn't know it was going to come to my house." Who could predict that stuff? That really was incidental because Steve's brother Mike was leaving the band. We needed a new drummer. And as friends do, friends always reach out and grab their other friends that are unemployed musicians to be in the band with them. So I called Charlie Flannery and told him about the setup, and he said, "Howie, get me an audition." So I recall the day we were all at the mansion, and all of the roadies and the people that lived in the mansion and everything were gathered around, and the groupies and whatnot. And there was Charlie, and he came in kind of looking like Charlie Watts of the Rolling Stones. He had a silver suit on, and he played and just laid down a solid beat, and everybody said, "All right, hallelujah. Mike, God bless you. Good luck at college. Charlie, you're in." So that's the way that worked out. We rehearsed, and then we went on the road. Now, we had a road manager named Howie Doc Reamer. And Doc was the guy that handled reservations, handled the bookings, made sure that we were always on course, we knew where we were going, and basically tried to keep us out of trouble. He was a great guy. So we had a tour set up, and we had a place that we played at in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, called the Colonel's Garter. And they always loved us there. And there was one girl, she was so beautiful. She was just, all right, okay. She was, but she had it for me. And so I always look forward to seeing her when we got there. And whether it was a broom closet or what, it didn't matter. Why am I telling you this? I don't know. But we would play at this club, and on this particular June night in 1972, we had pulled out of Rhode Island. We knew there was a hurricane coming called Agnes, and it was starting to rain, and we thought, who gives a shit? We're out of here. Off we go. So we're going to Pennsylvania. There's no hurricane there. So we played the first night, and it was great. And we went back to the hotel, and we woke up early because there was a lot of activity in the parking lot. We couldn't figure it out, so we all ran out in the parking lot, and there were these army trucks pulling in. We talked to some of the GIs, and we asked them, what's going on? And they said, the Susquehanna River has overflowed, and the whole town is flooded. Wilkes-Barre has been evacuated. And we said, what about across the river? And he said, oh, that's 20 feet underwater. Nobody can go there. We said, holy smokes. Can we get a ride downtown with you? We said, they said, sure, hop on back. So we just jumped on the back of the army truck and we rode downtown to the outskirts of town. And they said, you got to get out here. And so we found a building where the water hadn't risen to yet. It was evacuated, of course, and we went in and pressed the elevator and went up to the top and took the emergency stairway up to the roof. And we looked out and we saw the entire river. Man, I think it rained 17 inches overnight. It was just unbelievably dangerous. And we could see the water was creeping into the town closer and closer to the building we were at. We said, let's get out of here. So somehow we got back to the hotel. Steve and Mike Messier, one of the roadies, Mike and Jimmy McCahey were our two roadies. They decided to stay behind and see if they could salvage anything. They came back a week later and said everything was under mud and nothing was salvageable. Many of the guys were eligible for, I think, small business loans, and they got a little relief, but I wasn't eligible, so I didn't get any relief. And man, was I broke. So I actually, for 5 days, took a job as a dishwasher. That's as low as you can go as far as I'm concerned. So I went to work and I said, I'm going to go totally straight. I'm not taking anything. I'm just going to fucking stick it out. I made it to 11 o'clock and I slipped out to the payphone in the alley and I called Jane. I said, bring everything I've got. She showed up with a little paper bag. Anyway, after 5 days, Steve called me and he said, look, I've got another tour lined up. I said, great, I quit this job. And off we went. So we flew down to Louisiana, New Orleans, and we're at the airport. And the guitars are coming through because we had carried them on board. And the lady at the check-in place said, what's in that case? And Steve said, a bomb. And I just about went crazy. I said, Steve, how can you say that? Open it up, show her it's a guitar. Man, that is the most crazy thing I've ever heard. At the same time, John had somehow obtained a prescription for Reds, is what they called them in those days. They were basically barbiturates. And he had bribed Charlie, I think he had given him 2 or 3, to put him in a wheelchair and push him around the airport. So they were whacked out on Reds, and Steve and I are barely getting through without the FBI coming through there. We finally got out of the airport, got our rent-a-car. First night we're playing Alexandria Coliseum. If you've never played a Coliseum, all you see is lights. And there's just kind of a wash of sort of people on the floor, but it's more about what's happening on the stage, let me tell you. We continued the tour until we made it back home. The band had done a 35-state tour, opening for Edgar Winter and Alice Cooper, and would stay at the same hotel. Well, one afternoon, Steve Jablecki and I were walking down the hall, and we see Alice Cooper and Neil Smith just going into their room with a case of Budweiser. They invited us in, and Steve had a beer, and I wasn't a drinking guy, so I just sat there. And they had already finished an entire case and had all of the cans lined up and stacked up. And each one of them had a bed right next to each other, and they had BB pistols. And they were shooting the tin cans off their stack just for amusement. They were wild and crazy guys. When the band got to Hollywood, John Poole, the bass player, was on the dating game. Unfortunately, he wasn't chosen, but I think that was because the producer asked him, "What's your greatest attribute?" And he said, He said, "No, what's your biggest attribute?" And John said, so they had to go with some corny question, and he didn't get picked. It was great having roadies. Mike Messier was a really big guy and really tough looking, like you wouldn't want to mess with. Every band needs a guy like that. And then we had Jimmy McCahey, who was Irish and sort of the bull and tough. We were at a road stop somewhere, and this was when the people used to check under the hood, the oil and all that. And Jimmy said, "Hey, would you mind checking over here? There's some kind of a noise." The guy got his head down under the hood, and he said, "No, over here a little more." And he got a little bit more, and he got into perfect position, and Jimmy laid on the horn. Ah! He jumped up and he cracked his head on the hood, and I thought, oh man, what am I gonna do? Jimmy and Mike were really great roadies. They drove the trucks, had all the gear always set up for us, and supplied an occasional joke along the way. It was a lot of fun having some professional roadmen. And even to this day, Jimmy, Mike, and I are still in touch. The amazing power of technology. We had some very interesting times at the mansion, and Steve and I, many nights, would work on new songs and new ideas. Other times I'd go up to John Poole's room on the 4th floor. John Poole would stay up in his room for days practicing. He loved speed, crank, and so he'd get himself all wound up, and he might play for a day and a half, and then we'd come up and he'd be 3 sheets to the wind. Would have to get him up, check on him once in a while, say, "Hey, the band's rehearsing now." "Okay, come on down." We were just all brothers on the road, and it was such a lot of fun. This experience with the Wadsworth Mansion was really great, and I thought my career was taking off just the way I wanted to. At that time, the producers said they were moving out to California. That's where all the action was. So they went out and got settled, and they talked Steve into moving out there, and he got an advance from ASCAP, and he bought a house. Steve moving to LA sealed the deal, and that was the end of the Wadsworth Mansion. It was an incredible time. It was my first big time touring experience, and it lasted from January 72 to the end of August 72. But that just set up another great adventure to come in LA in about a year from now, when Steve and I will get together and really begin a great writing relationship. Now, I hope you stay with me through the future adventures, because we reform in California. Steve will give me a call, and I'll fly out there, and that's when all of the action really begins. I am not kidding you. You would not believe the people that I meet and play with out there. I hope you enjoyed this story. There's a lot more to come. So stay tuned for the next adventure of the old-time rock and roller. Now don't forget, if you like the video, please hit the like button, subscribe, Ring the bell if you want notifications of the next story. Keep the love in your heart, a song in your head, and I will see you again soon down the story highway. Take care.